Hello and welcome to my workshop. So today we're getting back on the VW Thing truck. We made a lot of good progress on this. There's still a bit more to go, so let's get started. I start back with the VW Thing pickup build by priming the body. I typically get the majority of the bodywork complete, as well as sanded to 220 grit. I'm adding in the windscreen hinges after sanding down the area to bare plastic. I try and glue these smaller pieces on after the body is primered. We went back and forth on the paint color, but finally decided on orange. The body gets a thin layer of color after it has been wet sanded down to at least 400 grit. This isn't a final color spray. I'm using a color and sheen to help identify small imperfections that may not show up in the primer. I messed up here by painting the entire taillight red. Later on I painted another set with a blank spot for the reverse light, but it pretty much looks the same as it did here. With the dash painted body color, I switched to hand painting the smaller details. The grab bar and upper and lower dash pad get painted black. I wish I had taped off the area, but I was already committed by the time I thought of it. In the end, the lines were okay, but it just took a little longer. The fuel filler cap was a recycled piece from a previous build. I took the model infusion and scaled it up before adding the VW logo on the end. I ended up using a series of twist drills before sanding with a rotary tool in order to get the opening size correctly. After doing this, I went to Harbor Freight and bought a new set of step drill bits. It's much easier and safer to use these on thin material. I was really happy with the door panels, even though they are super basic. All I needed to do was add in color for the handles and the one exposed screw. When doing my research, I noticed that a lot of VWs had a raised wooden floor. I assume this is to keep your feet out of the mess, much like the shower floors at a camp. I suppose shower shoes are optional. I decided to make a similar setup for the bed instead of in the cab. The wood comes from a dollhouse floor. The strips are pre-cut and glued down to paper. It's pretty quick to cut the strips apart and remove the paper. I didn't want to build this in place, so I set up some masking tape on the workbench. The bed shape was marked on the masking tape, and I started to set up the shape. sleepers were used to raise the wooden floor up off the bed. I then started gluing in strips using the masking tape template to keep things straight and true. Since it's not structural, I just use CA glue to keep the planks in place. My 1-2-3 blocks make a nice weight to help hold the piece down while drying. I took a sponge brush to slather some stain on the wood. After wiping down and letting it dry, I sprayed it with clear coat to seal in the stain. The front of the fenders were left whole, but now I needed to drill an opening for the lights. I am using an RC 4-wheel drive Mojave round lens in a 3D printed bezel I designed. The bucket is a small aluminum funnel with the tip cut off and a 5mm hole drilled in the end. Once all glued in place, it looks amazingly real. In a conversation with the customer, he mentioned about this being a beach cruiser. This immediately set my mind into gear. I often make little surprises for them, so I figured this would be a good opportunity. I searched the internet for images of a hibiscus flower and loaded the silhouette and a double stripe into the Cricut design space. In order to get multiple colors, I am cutting the same image in all the colors. I then carefully remove one color and transfer it to another until all the colors are in place. The final result is a blue double stripe with the two-tone pink flower. I figured you couldn't get more beachy than a Hawaiian hibiscus flower. Once all the colors are in place, I put some transfer tape down. This is a clear tape with a low tack. It is strong enough to remove all the weeded vinyl, but weak enough to allow it to be stuck to the body when pressed in place. I try to go slow when applying the vinyl stickers. The best way is to remove a small section of paper so that the sticker can be properly placed without the worry of wrinkling or accidentally sticking down the other end. You just work your way down slowly, removing more paper until it's all stuck in place. The windscreen comes next, and this is a dead simple one to make. Oftentimes there are curves and tape is needed to make the correct shape. Many times I will make a 20,000 stick styrene version to make sure the shape is correct before transferring to the clear material. The regular styrene is just much cheaper than the clear stuff. To cap off the windscreen, 3D printed wipers are glued into holes drilled earlier. The last major part which needs to be made are the seats. I was lucky to find a drawing of a seat from the top and the side. I just transferred this to some MDF and cut out the shape on the bandsaw. The seat is pretty simple, so not much more than rounding the edges is required. With the edges sanded down, I get the vacuum table ready to make the pieces. The back is the only piece which requires additional work. I take some 30,000 styrene and glue it on as the back. Any gaps are filled in with CA glue and sanded down to remove the seam. When I made the mold, I paid attention to the curve where the seat back meets the seat base. Having this match makes it much easier to glue them together. I have made seats which fold, but most of them are simply glued in place. I try and make as many of the large pieces removable. This is a bit of a pain since you need to glue in supports for screws to sink into. However, the benefit is tremendous in avoiding taping and potential messes when gluing in the pieces when the finished paint is done. I had to do something to tie in the beach vibe on the outside to the inside. I found a picture of a Hawaiian print. This was sent to my inkjet printer and cotton fused paper fed through. Once the color is printed on the thin cotton, it can be peeled away from the paper backing. The only downside is the edges fray easily. So to remedy this, I smeared on a thin line of fabric glue all around the edge of the pieces. These cotton prints were then sprayed with contact adhesive. Typically both pieces are sprayed and then allowed to dry before binding them together. I pushed them on when they were still a little damp, since the cotton will allow the glue to eventually dry, and this keeps me from having to tape the seats. I 3D printed some clear fender turn signals, which were painted up in amber and silver. These were then screwed and glued in place. So there are taillights and headlights which need LEDs. For the rear I used red LEDs and warm white ones for the front. Each one receives a resistor which allows the voltage to be dropped from the internal BEC to a safe level. For the rear, I tend to add one additional resistor, which makes them a little dimmer and gives more of a brake look. Friction tape is used to wrap up the wires. This does two things, one being disguising the wires. The other is to provide a way for the CA glue to bond easily to the body. A few drops of CA between the body and the fabric is all that is needed to keep the wire bundles in place. Once all the wires are glued down, a receiver end is crimped on so it can be plugged in the balance/battery plug of the receiver. The final surprise came after searching Thingiverse. This amazing surfboard was downloaded, and I printed out a hollow version on my 3D resin printer. My first attempt had a failure of the paint after pulling the tape off what I thought was a fully cured top. After thinking about this, I decided to just put vinyl on instead. This VW Thing truck has turned out much better than I could have imagined. I cannot wait to see pictures of this cruising down the beach. Until then, I'll see you on the rocks.